USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
First of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. First of all, before I ever start, I got to know, how many Marines do we have here? Okay, that's enough, yeah. And how many Vietnam veterans do we have here? Ooh. I have to ask those questions, thank you, because it depends on my talk now if we have any Vietnam veterans, because I have 3 rules, you know. 1, if anybody finishes before I do, it's okay to leave. I won't notice. 2, there's a fine line between charisma and bullshit. I'll try not to cross it today. And 3, as Andy knows, I have the right to remain silent. I don't have the ability. So let's kick it off. I want to do this in 4 parts. I'm going to tell you why I think I'm qualified to speak to you today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how we got into Vietnam. Most of you probably already know. And then we're going to talk about my first tour in Vietnam in 1969. I'll tell a couple war stories, probably exaggerate a little bit, but that's okay. And then we'll talk about the evacuation of Saigon in 1975. Why am I qualified? Well, I was born on 21 February 1945, the same day my dad crossed the beach at Iwo Jima as a private in the Marine Corps. More importantly, I have a daughter who was born on 10 November 1984, the birthday of our Corps. I take full credit for that. And lastly, I personally ended American involvement in the Vietnam War. I take full credit for that. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Vietnam and kind of set the stage for this thing. Remember when Eisenhower left office, 1961, we had 200 advisors in Vietnam. When Kennedy got assassinated in November of 1963, we had 16,000 to 18,000 combat troops in Vietnam. Now, something that people often forget was the Kennedy administration was very complicit in an act that happened on 1 November 1963. Our ambassador to Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge, our CIA, were very complicit, very involved in the assassination of President Diem of South Vietnam, our ally. And I think, like Colin Powell said once, if you break it, you own it. I think on 1 November 1963, we broke it, we owned that war. As Johnson becomes president, we start sending more and more troops. And then we had that incident in, we have some Navy people here, so that's good. In August of 1964, we have the Gulf of Tonkin incident where we had 2 American destroyers, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, who were reportedly attacked by torpedo boats from North Vietnam. Well, I think that's all been defunct now. It probably didn't really happen. But out of that came the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, where it was basically a carte blanche for Johnson. It was a declaration of war on North Vietnam. We soon started bombing. We started sending more troops. And I think we go in through this phase with Secretary of Defense McNamara and Johnson, which I refer to as the negotiation by escalation. We'd send more troops, NVA would send more troops. We'd bomb, they'd send more troops. We were making no progress. But America still supported the war. Americans supported the war until 1968. And remember, in 1968, we had 550,000 combat troops in Vietnam. That's a lot of combat power. Late January of 1968, we had the Tet Offensive, where basically the North Vietnamese Army and their indigenous allies, the Viet Cong, attacked every major city in Vietnam. And what people saw on TV was 3 weeks of the Battle for Hue City, where Marine battalions 2-5 and 1-5 fought in the old imperial city.
What kind of fighting is it going to be?
It's house to house and from room to room.
The most ambitious series of communist attacks yet mounted, spreading violence the entire length of the country.
Hue, the ancient imperial city.
We will prevail in Vietnam.
Although this was a devastating loss for the NVA and the Viet Cong's infrastructure was basically wiped out, America turned on the war in '68. And to put things in perspective, I'll tell you about, in June of 1968, we lost 2,500 combat people in Vietnam, KIAs, in 1 month. And we talk about the war in Afghanistan as our longest war. We lost 2,400 in 20 years. A little bit of a difference. I was giving that speech in Dallas one time. I was telling about the numbers, and the guy said, well, that's like a long weekend in Chicago. Probably not as funny as it is true. But so '68 saw us, it's kind of the year the dream died, if you ever read Whitcover's book. We had the Tet Offensive. We had the huge losses in June in Vietnam. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated after the Democratic primary. We had race riots in most major cities. And we had students, kind of sounds like a little bit like today, taking over the administration buildings in Norman's College. So '68 got us Nixon. Nixon was elected in 1968. So we see a little change. We're going to go to Vietnamization of the war. In other words, we're going to give the war back to the Vietnamese. Two significant events happened in January of 1969. One, Nixon was sworn in as President of the United States. And two, the United States Marine Corps decided to send Second Lieutenant Gerry to Quang Tri, Vietnam, to fly CH-46 helicopters in support of Marine Corps operations in Northern I Corps. Now, I wasn't a genius, but I figured out right away, I really didn't know how this war got started between North Vietnam and the United States, and that's what it was. Two, I certainly didn't know who was winning because we were doing the same thing that we were doing in 1966. We'd take a battalion of Marines out to the Tricorner area, Laos, North Vietnam, South Vietnam. They would fight for a couple of weeks. We'd lose a lot of Marines, kill a lot of NVA, probably lose a couple of helicopters along the way. Then we'd go get them and bring them back, and then 2 weeks later, we'd do the same thing all over again. So it was very hard to see who was winning. And lastly, I'll guarantee you, in 1969, whether you're in Hanoi, Saigon, Washington, D.C., or certainly Quang Tri, Vietnam, no one knew how this war was going to end. Now, by the fall of 1969, I was actually a first lieutenant, and I was a flight leader. And I'm going to tell you about a mission I had that I was very, very proud of. Helicopter pilots in here, which makes it better. I was assigned to pick up a recon team in the Ashaw Valley. We'd always send 6-man recon teams out to the valley. They'd search and they'd watch the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So this time we go out, and the Ashaw Valley is very low-lying. You'd get cloud layers sometimes. You couldn't get through. So this day we're out to pick them up. We have 2 CH-46 helicopters and 2 Cobra attack helicopters that are escorts. I'm the flight leader. We fly out, and the valley's covered in clouds, low-hanging clouds. So I called the team leader. I said, we can't get through the valleys. We can't get through. Marines were tough. He said, don't worry about it. Another day, another zone. Come back tomorrow. We come back the next day. Weather's the same. We do the same thing. Don't worry about it. Another day, another zone. The third day we go out. Weather's the same. Clouds are the same. Can't get through. So I call him up, and he says, well, we have an issue now, though. We've been spotted by the enemy. We've been in contact, and we have a wounded Marine. So he said, you got to get us out. Well, I think we all knew if you didn't get them out and they'd been in contact with the NVA, they probably weren't going to make it out. So I thought, you know, I've done GCAs before, which is a ground-controlled approach, where they put you on glide slope, they put you on heading, and you can fly in, but you land on a runway. So I thought if I knew where he was, being the boy genius that I am, I could probably set up my own approach and fly in. So I said, if you got a star cluster, shoot it up through the clouds. Boom, up it comes. I know where he is now. And So I said, I'm going to try to shoot an approach through there. And if you hear me coming, pop a yellow smoke, then I'll know where you are and I'll land and get you. So I start this approach in thinking, well, but I don't have a controller or anything. I'm in the goo for about 20 seconds, as helicopter pilots would imagine. I thought, this is probably the dumbest thing anyone has ever done. I'm going to crash this helicopter. I'm going to kill everybody on board, and I'm not going to do anything for the Marines on there. So I'm about to grab a handful of power. I pop out, there's the yellow smoke. Back to being a genius again, just like that. We land, get ready to pick them up, and then I start taking all kinds of small arms fire from off my left front. And I'm thinking, now, it's back to disaster again. Boom, that tree line just lights up with machine gun fire, rocket fire, and one of the Cobras came through with me. We didn't brief that, but he put that stuff out. So we fly back, we're doing a debrief, very successful. I'm very happy with this whole thing. So I said, I'll never forget his name. His name was Doug Simmons. Haven't seen him since. I said, why did you come through with me? He said, well, you know, we're Marines and we just wouldn't let you go through by yourself. So always remembered that. All right, let's go forward a little bit. Remember 1973, we have the peace accords. Henry Kissinger, Lee Dak-to, they both get the Nobel Peace Prize. Henry takes it. Lee Dak-to turns it down, obviously, because they're preparing another attack, obviously. So anyway, we get all of our POWs home, though, and we start evacuating all the Marines and Navy and Marines. We're taking all the combat forces out of Vietnam. And I think Snap wrote a great book on this. It's called A Decent Interval. About a year and a half later, the North Vietnamese attack. Late 74, they come across the border, come through the Central Highlands, and now we have a unique situation. Vietnam's going to fall. Meanwhile, the Navy and the Marine Corps team is out there already in evacuated Phnom Penh. For people who don't remember, Operation Eagle Pull. That was a very simple operation in Cambodia. One trip in, one trip out, and that's what we kind of imagined could happen in this one. Anyway, on 10 March 1975, the NVA launched their final attack to overrun and defeat the forces of South Vietnam. The forces of South Vietnam are ill-prepared for this battle. As most of you probably remember, we'd promised a lot of military help and hardware for them, which we refused to deliver at the time because Congress decided not to. So anyway, they've taken Hoi An, and the situation's getting worse. And on 28 and 29 April 1975, they bomb and rocket Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which means they can't use the runways anymore. That was the final evacuation point. We were going to use fixed-wing C-5As, C-141s, even commercial airplanes to take all the refugees out and all those people we had to get out. Now the runway's unusable. So now we're down to Admiral Graham Martin's last was 4 options. It's a helicopter operation. It's the Operation Frequent Wind of Marine helicopters off the ships into Saigon to take all the people out. Well, what's interesting about this is at 10:45 then on the morning of 29 April 1975, Graham Martin gives the order, the ambassadors in charge of these evacuations, to commence Operation Frequent Wind. But the Marines were prepared with the Navy. We were ready. We got a great assist from the Air Force. They provided 10 HH-53s to fly off the USS Midway. We had 2 big deck carriers that we turned into helicopter carriers, the Hancock and the Midway. The Air Force was going to work off the Midway. The Marines were going to work off the other platforms. Also, the Air Force was going to provide a Cricket, a command and control airplane overseas. They were going to fly also SAM suppression out of Utapao. And of course, the Enterprise was going to fly CAP, Combat Air Patrol, so there were no North Vietnamese airplanes that would bother us. The Navy and the Marines, with the Air Force assist, were ready. We had 71 transport helicopters, about 50-50 split between the large CH-53s, which could carry 33 combat troops, which means sometimes they could put 70 to 80 Vietnamese without bags on there, and the CH-46, which I flew, we could carry 25 combat troops, so we would put 50 plus Vietnamese on those when we were flying.
We all decided to try and reach the United States Embassy, and once there, we found it surrounded by Vietnamese looking for a way in and a way out. Helicopters were landing on the roof and inside the compound as we walked to the back of the embassy, We had to push and shove our way through a crowd of several hundred Vietnamese trying to scale the walls, only to be knocked back by U.S. Marines. Once inside the compound, for the Americans and those Vietnamese who managed to get in with legal documents, and the many who managed entrance without, the rest was easy. It was just a matter of waiting your turn for a helicopter to take you to one of the ships on station off the Vietnamese coast. The American fleet had been having problems since the start of the evacuation, with the arrival of South Vietnamese pilots and their helicopters loaded with family and friends. Hovering above the decks to unload their passengers, the pilots were unfamiliar with landing their craft on a moving ship. One crashed into the side of the USS Blue Ridge, others managed to crash land on the deck of the ship. For those that did manage to put down, they were simply pushed over the side and into the sea by U.S. sailors and Marines to make room for the returning American craft based on that ship, filled with evacuees from Saigon. Other South Vietnamese pilots just hovered long enough to unload their passengers and then headed to the side of the ships and just jumped out with their life vests to be picked up by U.S. sailors, their helicopters crashing into the sea. Still other pilots headed out to the side of the ships after unloading their passengers and settled the craft into the water and then jumped out, again waiting to be picked up by U.S. sailors.
My mission that day, even though the primary evacuation point was still going to be the DAO compound at Tan Son Nhut Air Place, my mission that day when it came out was Lady H-09 was to fly to the embassy, pick up the ambassador, and take him to the command ship, the USS Blue Ridge. So I launch, it's 12:30, I'm about the first one off. I land behind the embassy, they've taken the famous tree out. The crowds are immense. As far as you can see down the streets, they're immense. On the grounds of the embassy, hardly any room to land the helicopter, but we do. But nothing happens. So I called the Marine security guard over and I said, I'm here to get the ambassador. This is Lady H-09. So he runs into the embassy, comes back and says, the ambassador's not ready to go. We're going to load you up with refugees, third country nationals, whatever. So we take off. I have a wingman with me. He loads up. We're heading out. Of course, I'm Lady H-09, so when I contact Gallant Man, who's helicopter direction control on the USS Okinawa, he vectors me directly to the Blue Ridge where I can drop off the ambassador that I don't have. So I land on the Blue Ridge. Out comes General Gerry and Admiral Whittemire. They want to know where the ambassador is. So I told him he wasn't ready to go. I land behind there. And right away I'm thinking, you have direct comm with the ambassador. The White House has direct comm with the ambassador. You could have coordinated this. I assumed that's what you'd probably done. I have no comm with him. So he says, well, you got to go get the ambassador. So General Gerry, I fly back in. We do the same routine again, land behind the embassy, pick up a bunch of packs. They vector me again to the Blue Ridge. Same routine with the General, the Admiral. Where's the ambassador? I said, we stop, we try to get him. Nothing. Well, we continue the lifts. We are losing the bigger 53s to do the DAO compound. And the embassy is not even supposed to be an evacuation point, even though the crowds are never any smaller. They're getting bigger. And so later in the day, I'm still flying. I'm not going to the Blue Ridge anymore because I never have the ambassador. But as the day goes on, we finish at the DAO compound. Now everybody's working the embassy. We've probably taken off every 2 minutes. A CH-46 off the roof or a 53 from behind, because 53s are too large to land on the roof. It goes on as the day goes on, the weather gets worse, continue the lift, but the crowds never get any smaller. Now it's like 7 or 8 at night, weather's deteriorated, but I noticed something. There's not near as many helicopters flying as there was earlier in the day. This goes on for a while, and every once in about every fourth flight I land on the Blue Ridge and General Gerry comes out and wants to know where the ambassador is. My thoughts are always the same. You have communication with him, I don't. So as the day goes on, now it's about 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm still flying, I don't hear anything, nothing. So I call my wingman, I said, do you hear any other helicopters out here? He said, no, I don't hear anything. So now it goes forward, it's like 4 in the morning. I've been out there about 16 hours flying. So you start to get irritated. So I called Gallant Man again and said, can I give you a sit rep? I'm taking a group of passengers out to the ship. He said, yeah, please give me a sit rep. So I said, well, I can see the tanks coming down the road. They're not far from the city. They're going slow, but they're going to be here real soon. 2, the crowd's the same as it was this afternoon on the embassy grounds. We're not making any progress. 3, the ambassador's still here. And 4, can you confirm that we only have 2 helicopters flying now, Lady A09 and Wingman? He said, thank you for the sit rep, but yes, we only have 2 flying. As any Marine would do, the question was, why? We said, well, we shut down some for maintenance and the rest for crew rest. So, yeah, that's right. Your brain goes, wait a minute. I think I was the first guy off. That crew rest would be a nice thing to have. So I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, well, proceed with the mission. I thought, okay, fine. So we drop the packs off. We go back. We're going back to the embassy. But now you're in the extremely pissed off phase because you don't realize what's happening. You don't see any progress. Nothing's going to happen. You don't know who's in charge. So we land on the roof now. I can tell you exactly the time, 4:56 on 30 April 1975. Land, load me up again with third country nationals, some Vietnamese. I said, my crew chief, get them all off. I'm not doing this. Called the Marine security guard over and I said, you tell the ambassador, go down and tell the ambassador, Lady A09 is not leaving the roof until the ambassador's on board, the president sends. He goes down the stairs. 2 minutes later, they were so ready to go. Their bags are with them. They're on that airplane. We're out of there. Now I'm flying out. Of course, I'm going to go to the Blue Ridge, take credit for this thing. But anyway, as we're flying out, I'm thinking, this guy just wanted to be ordered out. I could have done this 8 hours ago. Saved myself a lot of heartache.
The aircraft that took the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador out, Graham Martin, was another H-46, just like this one. It was 154-803, which is in San Diego, the Flying Leatherneck Museum in San Diego. Took the ambassador out at about 0500 in the morning on April 30th. And the guard was left behind, and when 154-803, which was call sign was Lady Ace 09, took off, it sent out a code message that said the Tiger is out, and all the other aircraft in the area thought that that meant that the mission was complete.
But anyway, now we land on the USS Blue Ridge. We've got the ambassador, everybody's happy. General Gerry comes out, he's very pleased. He said, well, now you got to go back and get the Marines. I said, obviously, nobody else is flying, somebody has to go back and get the Marines. But I said, we need another helicopter. There were 61 of them. The guy gave me a note on how many there were. 25 combat Marines and 11 security guards. So I said, we need another one. We can't get them all. And they did crank up another airplane. We did go back. We land, we get the Marines. And now, after we get the Marines, now I'm really thinking. I said, hey, you know, the president had direct comm with Ambassador Martin. He didn't order him out. Henry Kissinger, his immediate boss, Secretary of State, has direct comm with him. He didn't order him out. General Gerry, Admiral Whitmire could have done something. No, he was ordered out by that roguishly handsome global soldier of the sea, Captain Gerry Berry. That's my story, and that's how the Vietnam War ended. Yeah.